Today we're going to look at some examples of functions that print output for the user. These are different from functions that return a value because the thing that is printed out is for the user to look at, and it can't be used by the rest of the script or by the rest of the computer program. So let's just use some of these functions to get an example. Notice that I defined a function called print greeting, and it prints hello, I hope you're having a great day. If I click run so that all these two functions get defined, then I can use them over here in the console. So just like I expected, it says, hello, I hope you're having a great day. So something that you might think you can do is, oh, I'm going to save that message. I know that if I want to create a variable called anything you want, like message, and say equals, and you're maybe used to calling a function and then hitting enter and then having the value of that function that function returns be stored in your variable message. So you might think, oh, let's see what's stored in message, and in this case nothing is stored in message. And that's because this function print greeting does not return anything. It doesn't say return anywhere. Now if I had, instead of printing, if I had put return right here, let me hit run to redefine all these functions. Now if I do print greeting, it looks similar to what there was before, except you see that it's in green and there's a little arrow right here. So what it means is that it's only printing it out because it's the only command that you wrote. So over here in the console, if a function returns something and that value doesn't get stored in a variable, then it prints it out so you can see what it is. But if you store that value, so you say create a variable called message and say equals print greeting. Now right now this function has a really bad name, print greeting, because it's not printing anything. So, but if I hit enter and then see what is inside message, I'll see that message contains this greeting. So I'm going to change this back to what it's supposed to be, print greeting. And notice how this is a function that does not return anything, so you should never do something like this, message equals print greeting. That doesn't make sense. Print greeting is not going to return a value, so nothing is going to get stored in the message variable, and it will just be empty, and you won't be able to use it for anything. So remember, functions that print stuff are for showing the user information. You show a message to the user, you display some instructions to the user. It's not for using a value in a computer script. So if you wanted to save a message in a variable, then you would need to use a different function that returns something. Let's look at the next function, print a personalized greeting. This is different from the first function because it takes an input value. So I'm going to copy that, and let's just delete this right here. So I'm going to say print personalized greeting, and if I try to call it without passing in an argument, then it's going to tell me there's an error because the print personalized greeting function requires one positional argument called name. So if I hit up and I go back and I provide a name as a string, then it will say, hello Mike, I hope you're having a great day. Notice how the way that this works is it takes the string hello, the string name, and the string period, I hope you're having a great day, exclamation point, and it puts them all together using a plus sign. When you put plus signs in between strings, it doesn't add them together, it concatenates them, it joins them together into one big string. Plus sign in between numbers adds them together. A plus sign in between strings concatenates the strings or joins them together into one big string. Let's look at the next one. So this function right here, you can pass in any string you want, like hello, and then it prints 3 lines. So you see the 3 print functions here. One is it prints the hashtag, and notice how it's doing something weird. We're taking a string and we're multiplying it by something. And what we're multiplying it by is the length of the string. So for example, in the one I just did, hello period is 6 characters long. So it did a hashtag times 6, and that's why it first printed out 6 hashtags. Then next it printed out the string, and then on the last line it printed out hashtag times the length of the string, so 6. I can make it a lot longer. How are you? And it's just going, since the string is longer, there are going to be more hashtags printed out. Next one, let's say you're making a game and you want to be able to print out some instructions to the user at some point, so you create a function that prints out the instructions. Then when it's time to print out the instructions, in your script you can call this function and then it will print out the instructions. Sometimes you want to get input from the user, and the only way you can do that is to display a message to the user, wait for the user to type something in, and then you can take the value that they typed in and you can store it and use it somehow. So for example, here's a function that will get the name of a user. So when I hit enter, notice how it outputs this right here. What is your name? And I had put an extra space in here, but it looks like the input function already adds a space in, so you don't need that extra space right there. I'm going to stop and redefine all of these. Let's see, so get the username. Now it says, what is your name? And notice how it adds a little space for you, and then there's a portion right here for the user to type in. So notice that I typed in my name, and then it stored it into a variable called name, and then this function right here returned name. So right now you see the green text and you see the little arrow, which means this function is returning something. That means that you could store the name if you want. So let me create a variable called stored name, and it's going to be equal to get user name. Notice how it has that first ask me for the name, and then once it asks me for the name, this time it didn't print it out because I was storing it in a variable. Remember, the only time the console prints out something that gets returned is if you don't do anything with it. If you don't store it, the console just assumes that you probably want to see the value, and so it prints it out for you using this equal sign and greater than symbol to look like an arrow, and it highlights everything in green. All right, let's go to the next one, get user age. It's a little bit different, so let's type get user age. What is your age? Type 37, and notice how it returns 37. Notice how this did not have the little quotes around it. So this is returning an integer and not a string. And the way that that happened is because once I got the age, and it's going to always assume that it's a string. So when this function first got the input and I typed in 37, what it was thinking of a 37 like that, like a string 37. And then I used a function called int to convert that string into a number. Let me show you that function working a few times. So if you use the int function and you type in a string that's actually a number, then it will change it to a number. So now it doesn't have any quotes. If you try and use the int function on something that's not a number, then it's going to be an error. If you try to use the int function on something that is a number but is not an int, that it's a float, then it will also do an error. There's also a function for float. So if you ever need to change a string that represents a number into an actual number, a float, then you can use the float function. So it's just a little example to show you how this works right here. And then it returns age. And this last function right here just combines a few of these ones up here to show you how they can all work together. So tell the user how many years they have until retiring. So if you run this function, what is your name? Mike. Hello, Mike. I hope you're having a great day. What is your age? 37. And then it says it is 28 years until you retire. Notice how the 37 didn't get printed out anywhere like it did up here. That's because in the script over here, I stored the return value of get user age into a variable. Then I used that variable to figure out how many years until retirement. And then when I wanted to concatenate everything into one big sentence, it is 28 years until you retire, I had to first convert the integer, the number, into a string, so that when I use the plus sign, everything's strings. If you ever try to add a number to a string, 3 plus high, then you're going to get an error. But if you try to add two strings together, then they will be concatenated and blended into one string. Notice how we used the string function when we wanted to convert an integer into a string, and we used the int function when we wanted to convert a string into an int. Remember, whenever you use the input function, you have to type in a little message that you want the user to see. Enter your favorite word, and you would usually do this in the script, but anything you can do over here in this scripting area, you can also do over here, one command at a time in the console. So if I hit this, then it'll wait for me to enter a word. Let's see, star, we'll type the word star, and notice how the input function returns a string. So if I do that again and I type a number, 85, notice how it's going to convert it to a string. So no matter what you type in, even if you think it's a number, it's always going to convert it to a string. So whenever you use the input function, which you can use to display a message to the user, and then get, and then this function right here will return whatever the user typed in as a string. If it's supposed to be a number, go ahead and convert it to a number. Just remember that if you think it's going to be a number and then the user doesn't type a number, this will give an error and your script will halt and it will crash. Let me, for example, let me show you how that happens. If I try and use the tell user how many years until they retire, so if I say Mike and it says what is your age and I say hi, instead of finishing the rest of the script right here where it tried to do get user age and it got to this line and tried to convert the word hi into an integer and that failed. So notice how there was an error. It said an invalid literal for int with base 10 and it showed me what the invalid value was. Hi is not a valid value for the int function. And so it crashed. We'll talk about in future lessons how you can prevent a user error like this from crashing the whole function, and that you can give the user extra messages to help them realize what they're supposed to type in. But for today, we're just focusing on functions that do output, that print things, some functions that get input from the user, and normally those functions will return the input that they got. Notice how this one gets a string from the user, this one gets an int from the user, and then how you can combine all of these things to print messages to the user, get information from the user in an interactive function.